But we're going to start off talking about Rupert Lowe, what's going on there, and we've got Ben Habib on the show. Hi, Ben. He's on the phone.
Oh, good. Hi, Ben. How you doing?
Good evening. Very good to speak to both of you.
Why are you on the phone? Why aren't you in your nice office with your red, nice, shiny walls?
Well, it's 10 p.m. Friday night. I've had a couple of drinks. I think I'm entitled to let my hair down.
I thought you'll be celebrating Rupert's wonderful victory now that they're not going to pursue the charges. What's the latest on that? Have you spoken to Rupert?
Yes, I mean, Rupert and I have remained in contact, you know, ever since we were colleagues in Reform. Just because I left Reform didn't mean I stopped being in touch with Rupert. But I mean, obviously, I was I can't begin to understand the emotional strain that must have been on Rupert. But I had no doubt ever that the complaints were frivolous and vexatious. They just didn't add up to me. You know, the complaint made to the police was made a day or two after Rupert Lowe's article was printed in which he was questioning Nigel Farage. It was made 3 months after the alleged incident. It seemed to me that it was designed, as was the implication, that Rupert had been bullying two women in his office, which now transpires not to be correct. You know, it all looked conspired and confected by...
Did you ever get an inkling of that sort of thing? I mean, I know you had a problem, but it was quite sudden, your thing, wasn't there? Wasn't really... Or did you notice things happening months before?
Well, you know, that's a really interesting question, Ash, because on the 28th of February, early in the morning, I've been thinking about what was going on between... I knew Rupert and Nigel Farage were not getting on particularly well, and 28th morning, I texted Rupert and I said, look, I can sense things aren't going right. And if I were you, I would resign before they sack you, because if you allow them to sack you, they control the narrative and they will try and rubbish you. And the reason I said that, Ash, was because I'd seen dozens of people set aside by Farage-Ysef and Nigel Farage in the preceding 6-7 months since Farage came back as leader and Ysef took over as chairman. And every time that they did it, they didn't have the courtesy to thank these people, perfectly good members of Reform who'd put the party on the map, campaigned for the party, etc. They never thought to thank them, commend them for their services and wish them a happy life. Every time they sacked someone, they tried to damage their reputation.
And did they have sort of secret meetings? I heard things like that there were meetings and other people didn't know about them that they were having.
Well, they had, so they would say that you're under investigation and you're suspended until this investigation takes place. Invariably, the people who had been suspended never had an opportunity to attend any hearings or disciplinary procedures that were apparently taking place, and then they just got a verdict, and the verdict was invariably bad. And so I'd seen it unfold repeatedly. And so when it came to Rupert's turn, as it were, I could sense it coming, and I said, Rupert, just resign before they do anything. But I'd never anticipated actually that they'd sink as low as making a complaint to the police. Now, I've seen Alex Phillips earlier on Talk saying, you know, Rupert, make up, the nation needs solidarity. It's not about making up. If Reform UK tried to get Rupert Lowe imprisoned, it is not for Rupert Lowe to try to make up with Reform UK. The police have now dropped their complaint. We've had stonewall silence from Nigel Farage and Farage-Ysef, particularly Farage-Ysef, who obviously made the complaint.
Well, Rupert Lowe's given them an ultimatum, haven't they, before he will take legal action for them.
There was the other thing, wasn't there, Ben? The other thing on that, apart from the criminal charges, there was also the suggestion about dementia. And I know when you and I spoke about this beforehand, there was the ultimatum given that if he didn't retract that, legal action would happen. What's the latest on that?
So there are a couple of things, if I can just say. So it wasn't criminal charges, it was a criminal complaint made by Ysef, just to be clear on. The charges were never brought.
Right,
the thing was
an allegation,
It was an allegation, and the complaint...
And the CPS said there was nothing to see
and
here,
the CPS says, absolutely. And there was an implication that he'd bullied two women, actually against a falsity. There's no parliamentary inquiry taking place into whether or not Rupert Lowe bullied people. But as you rightly say, Andrew, there was an insinuation too that he was suffering from early onset dementia.
Which he obviously isn't when you see him interviewed. I mean, I saw that Emily Maitlis ridiculous interview where they're really grasping at straws, that lot, aren't they? Just to throwing the racist thing out there now, and it just bounces off now. It has no effect, and they don't know what to do.
Well, there was the threat. There was the threat of legal proceedings if they didn't, as I understand from our earlier conversations, if they didn't withdraw that accusation. What's the latest on that?
Correct. So he gave Nigel Farage, he gave Reform, Farage-Ysef and Lee Anderson, who are the three respondents to his claim, until I think a couple of days ago, in order to come up with an apology. He wasn't demanding any damages or anything like that. And they haven't come back. And I think this now leaves Rupert Lowe in a position where he needs to decide what the next steps are. I suspect Rupert Lowe, being the gentleman that he is, will give them a bit more time.
But he will take legal action. He said that, and I imagine he's a man of his word.
He is a man of his word. But you know what I find astounding, I welcome your view on this, is if you've made a police complaint against a perfectly sensible, law-abiding, first-class MP, and the police decide not to take action, you'd think you'd hear from Farage-Ysef and Nigel Farage, wouldn't you?
Well,
you'd think you'd hear them say something like, okay, well, you know, I mean, for example, Farage-Ysef could have said, I felt threatened. It took me a while to make the complaint. I recognize now that I made a mistake. You know, let's try and build bridges. You know, please forgive me if there was a transgression made. It wasn't, you know, intentional. Nothing. Stony silence. And I tell you, that tells me, gentlemen, that tells me that Farage-Ysef knows that he was behaving like an abominable adolescent.
So should he resign?
He should resign, or he should be sacked. And the fact that Farage won't sack him, it confirms that Farage and Ysef are in this together.
Why is he suddenly in with Nigel Farage so much? I mean, why are they now, you know, unsplittable pair? They seem to be.
Oh, that's another really good question. The answer is that I can't get to the bottom of that. He gave £200,000 to Reform in June or July 2024, but that is not sufficient money to make Farage take the knee to Ysef. There's something else going on. Ysef had no political footprint before the 30th of June 2024. He came out of nowhere, emerged at one conference, a week later or 10 days later was chairman of Reform. There is something between Farage and Ysef.
So what do you think that... Let me put your pressure on that then, Ben. You've said that beforehand. What do you think that something is?
I can't answer. I genuinely can't answer.
All I can say is, I mean, if there's, is it about influence? Is people have suggested that Nigel's there, sort of basically a one personality party?
He's like the Lord Ali to Keir Starmer sort of thing,
is that right?
Apart from he is chairman.
He might be the Lord Ali, you know, the equivalent of Lord Ali to Keir Starmer. I don't know. I mean, you know, what are the things that generally influence people in life? It's money. It's
power. I mean, he's got money, so it's about power, isn't it?
Yeah, power, influence, something, whatever. He's got some hold on.
What's
Farage.
your experience with Zia then?
I've only ever shaken hands with him once.
Yeah, because he wasn't there long, was he, before now he's at the top of the tree?
No, exactly. I only met him inadvertently once.
Yeah, and they're also, Ben, there seems to be a pattern, doesn't there? You touched on this at the very beginning, about when people are basically thrown out of Reform, if they go against Nigel's opinion or say something negative about him. Nigel himself, he said it was a champagne moment when you left. What was your response to that?
No, you know, that's extraordinary to me. When I left on, I would say, ideological grounds, and I did a little video in which I explained all the reasons I was leaving, and all of them had to do with policy, the lack of democratization in the party. These were all things that were not personal. And I had no animosity towards Farage. I have question marks over Farage, but no animosity. And he came back with an absolutely personal attack on me. Yeah. By the way, completely misjudging me, calling me bitter and...
He did that with Rupert Lowe, didn't he, recently?
He did.
I think he said he was a nobody, these are nobodies.
No,
so when
he said I was a nobody. Is that
a fault of Nigel, then? Is that some sort of narcissistic fault that, you know... he shouldn't really come out with that as a politician.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, I had been entirely sort of policy and substantively basing my criticism of Farage. But you're right, Ash, and this is now an ad hominem attack by me on Farage. He is a narcissist. He is incapable of tolerating anyone around him that might outshine him. As a consequence of that, good people are cut down, and he ends up surrounded by sycophants.
Whereas Trump is a narcissist. I think maybe Thatcher was, but they needed people around them to give them that extra boost, didn't they?
And what?
I mean, Trump has some very brave thinkers and speakers around him.
But the other thing as well, though, Ben, is that Nigel he's touched a nerve with the people of the Great British Republic, if you like, because he's highlighted issues that haven't been highlighted about immigration and so on and so forth. Do you think the public's been misled about Nigel?
Absolutely misled. The persona of Nigel Farage is someone who's effectively a nationalist, stands on a platform that's anti-immigration, beats the drum for the patriotic vision of a United Kingdom. The reality is that Farage is a political expedient. He bends in the wind to pursue popularity, very much in the same vein that Boris Johnson did. A fantastic campaigner, but he doesn't have a philosophical political framework on which he hangs his responses and his thinking. And he will just bend.
So do you think the general public are being conned?
I do, absolutely. And I think, let me put it this way. We all know that I hope we all know that the allegations made against Rupert Lowe were absolutely concocted, designed to ruin the man. Now, if they're prepared to do that, they are prepared to con anyone in and around them. The other big con,
and they'd have state power, a bit like what Keir Starmer is doing now. I mean, also Rupert Lowe, what's next for him and what's next for you? Because, you know, he was talking about the Tory party, but they'd have to change. He was sort of making overtones. He'd want to be leader. What about you? You and him, he also mentioned your future, and you've got a political party. Is it a political party? Or
Integrity.
Is
it a
party? It's not a party. Is it a party?
It's a company limited by guarantee, which is a non-profit company, which bizarrely, what attracted me to it, it's not registered with the Electoral Commission, but what attracted me to it is that it's a self-declared political, describes itself as a political entity, and it's got a bank account, and it's quite difficult getting a bank account as a political activist party, whatever. Yes. So it presented itself as an interesting opportunity to actually take the fight to not just now the Tory party, who've forgotten what it means to be conservative, but also Farage, who seems to have forgotten the platform on which he made his reputation.
You've got 4 years to the election. Could you actually challenge reform? Could there be an alternative party to them? And would you? I mean, they've done very well reform with these council elections. Could you get in place? It's amazing how quick they've sorted that out. Could you do that with Rupert Lowe? Organise something and get something going. Get Elon Musk. He was your mate, wasn't he? That was one of the pivot points with Nigel falling out. But could you get it going and have a party going by in 4 years' time?
So I was very, very encouraged by the local election results, because what they told me, what the local election results informed me about, was that basically the British electorate are prepared to move away from the cultural propensity to vote either Labour or Conservative, number one. So they're prepared to vote for something new. And actually, they were prepared to come out in numbers. The silent majority that voted to leave the EU, the same majority that voted Boris Johnson in, are still there, and they're still wanting that change. Farage doesn't offer it. Yeah. Reform UK is pivoting towards becoming Tory Mark II. And so I think there's a big gap opening up for a political force.
Yeah, and the Tories aren't the Tories, and Labour aren't the Labour anymore. So they're sort of finished, and it's not a protest vote anymore, these new... Well,
it is, no.
Well, the other thing you said, though, Ben, when we... And you've been on my show several times, you talked about you want to unite the right, is what you previously said to me. And you said that the general public, we do not need, these were your words to me, we do not need another political party. What's your response to people who say you're fragmenting the vote on the right and therefore Labour will get in anyway?
Well, you can only fragment a vote if there's an election taking place. There's no election taking place till 2029. And the key thing to do right now is make sure that the narrative, the agenda, the ideology that is being proposed to the British electorate is one that will genuinely deliver this country away from the danger in which it now finds itself. Farage doesn't offer it, even though his persona might. In reality, he doesn't. The Conservatives seem to be holding their cards so close to their chest, no one knows where they stand. So
They don't know where they stand.
They don't know where they stand. So my intention is to show the path, the policies, and what's required to be done to save the United Kingdom, appeal to the British electorate, and make sure that we get into the electorate psyche. And then when it comes to, the election tactics for 2029, that's something we look at in 2028 in the lead up to the election. But what is critical right now is to make sure that we have the right policies, the right agenda, the right narrative, the right ideology, the right political philosophy that will save the UK.
Okay,
that's the critical thing.
No, absolutely, and you talked about that, but avoiding the generalities, what are those right policies? Because you look at the difference between the narrative peddled by Nigel, some of the dividing things with people like Tommy Robinson, for example, some of the dividing things about how strict we should be on immigration and what should happen. What is your position on both of those?
So, Tommy Robinson has become the Voldemort, if you like, of British political discourse. You mention his name, and either if you support him, you become vilified by certain parts of society. If you denounce him, you become vilified by the other, by the opposite side. It's not about Tommy Robinson. We've got to stop talking about personalities. Tommy Robinson and his incarceration at the moment is merely one example of the two-tier criminal justice system that we see operational in the United Kingdom, which Farage is prepared to call out when he sees it favouring the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli marches, but seems incapable of calling it out when it is white British citizens who are on the end of suffering at that of the suffering of the he hasn't
said anything, as far as I know, about the Lucy Connolly thing, has he?
Absolutely nothing.
Which is very odd, isn't it?
Nothing on Lucy. Now, after the Southport riots, after the Southport protests, Farage said this was the biggest political cover-up in history, and he has never told us what it was that was being covered up.
Yeah.
He said it was going to be the biggest ever exposed. I mean, it has been a bit exposed last week with that police report, hasn't it? When they said Starmer, it wasn't far right. They didn't bus or train themselves.
But it wasn't Farage who revealed it.
No, it's very odd. He's sort of gone quiet about that.
So what would the revelation be then, Ben? Because you must have discussed this with him. You were part of the party at that stage. What was the big revelation?
There was no... I didn't discuss it with him, but there was never any revelation. It's a bit like Farage saying in January that he was going to have an inquiry into the rape gangs, and that even though it would have no judicial effect, people wouldn't be forced to testify. It would have so much momentum. It would garner support across the country, and people would be compelled to come and answer.
Right.
And then 3 months later, when Rupert Lowe launched exactly that inquiry, he denounced Rupert Lowe.
So flip-flopping.
Farage is he's all over the place.
But he couldn't lead, could he, like that? Do you think he actually wants to be leader, or do you think he'd be a bit intimidating and go, I don't really want to be Prime Minister? Do you think he'd be, he'd have that, what's it called, syndrome when you're in position and you don't think you should be?
Well, the thing about Nigel Farage is that if you don't have the conviction that Rupert Lowe and certainly Rupert Lowe and certainly I do, we are only in politics because we absolutely feel the conviction of the need to do something. if you're in it because you want self-promotion, you want to have eyes on you, you want to make money, whatever it is, then you'll say whatever you think you need to say in order to promote your political capital. And I'm afraid that's where Farage is. Now, this is an ad hominem attack, but you've asked me some straight questions. I'm giving you some straight answers. Farage is not in it because he is a conviction politician.
Well, he's not a conviction politician. Yeah.
He isn't. He's not.
So what should he do then, Ben? You say he's misled the public about his real policies. You said he's duped them effectively. What should he do?
Well, first of all, he needs to restructure his party so that it becomes truly representative of its membership and that there is accountability, checks and balances within the party. In the absence of that, the party is fundamentally flawed. It'll never succeed. That's number one. Number two, then he needs to understand. He needs to determine what it is that the party stands for, and he needs to set out its aims, and then he needs to create policies that deliver those aims. And then on the back of those policies, he needs to draft legislation. Frankly, he needs to get down to that level of detail, draft legislation which would deliver the policies and ultimately deliver the ideology of the party.
And would you ever join forces with him again?
I would never. If he democratizes the party, puts proper checks and balances in place, then it's not about me joining him. It would be about me joining an entirely new entity. So I reserve judgment if he were to do all of that. But from what I've seen in the past, and what I know of the man and what is now being repeatedly confirmed is that's not his agenda. He's got no desire to do any of that.
Yeah.
And
you said also, Ben, just to pick up a few points, you've also said that he said nothing about Lucy Connolly's case. What's your own views on her case?
She should never have been incarcerated, nor should Peter Lynch have been incarcerated. I think there were 400 people. I think in the space of 2 weeks, I'm going by memory, Andrew, but I think in the space of 2 weeks, 1,000 people were arrested and charged over those protests, 400 of whom had not done anything violent. They had just said and tweeted stuff. And it is completely wrong that in the aftermath of a horrendous crime where 3 beautiful little girls were brutally stabbed, and we now discover one of them 125 times stabbed, a 9-year-old girl, and partly beheaded. And the other 2, I think one was stabbed 86 times and the third one a similar number. And other girls were injured. It seems to me absolutely horrendous that in the aftermath of that, the Prime Minister didn't seek to put the protective blanket of the British state around the proverbial shoulders of the British people. Instead,
and the local community who actually accused of being far right, busting, and they were actually genuinely disillusioned people. So they weren't violent, like you said, and some of them just shaking their fists. And also their lawyers, if they pled not guilty, they were mainly let off. Their lawyers have a lot to answer for. Their defence lawyers.
This point I made about Lucy Connolly is that she should not have pleaded guilty to incitement, and she was probably persuaded to do so on the basis that she might have got a lower sentence. What's your view on that?
I completely agree with you. And the same goes for Peter Lynch, who didn't say, he didn't do anything violent. He was charged with having been violent. Peter Lynch didn't do anything
He just
violent.
shouted something in out of placard. That's all he did, and that man died because of that. Anyway, look, we've got to take a break. Thanks for coming on, Ben, and look forward to whatever's going on, if it's with you and Rupert or not. You're going to write a book, Ben? Is all this going to come out, like Prince Harry?
I haven't got a book in me. I can write an essay.
We all have. Yeah, an essay.
It's the new Game of Thrones, so we could work on that basis.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.